Republican Senator Gregg lets us all have it right between the eyes. Now, he's not sugarcoating his view about where we are headed, but he also has some ideas how we can avoid it. He went on the record on Capitol Hill. Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Oh, Greta, great to be back. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
We always like talking money with you in the state of our federal government, and
we don't have much money, and we're out of money.
All right, well, I guess we're not
that's simple.
We're going to talk about what we don't have then. You've been talking about recently putting a cap on discretionary spending. Right. Okay, first of all, what is discretionary spending?
It's a third of the government. The rest of the government is entitlement spending and interest on the debt. And entitlement spending is what people have a right to. If you're a veteran, you have a right to certain payments. Discretionary spending, on the other side, is money which the government makes a decision every year to spend, whether it's on education, whether it's on defense, whether it's on laying out and building roads. That's all discretionary. We don't necessarily have to spend it. We just make a decision to spend it, and it represents 30% of the federal budget approximately.
You want to put a cap on this, on increasing it?
Absolutely. You know, we simply can't afford the federal spending we're doing. We're running a $1.4 trillion deficit, and we've got to control spending not only on the entitlement side, which is where the majority of the spending is, but also on the discretionary side, because it compounds very quickly. In other words, if you spend $10 today to do a program, which is discretionary, next year you're going to spend $10, that $10, plus you're going to add something more to it. And it just builds on itself, and it compounds very quickly. So even though in the context of the total federal budget, if you only save $10 billion, which is a lot of money, it would run the state of New Hampshire for years, but if you save $10 billion, which isn't perceived as a lot of money in the federal budget of $3 trillion, the next year it's going to be $10 billion plus another $3 billion, and then 13 billion plus another 3 billion, and it adds up very quickly. So if you can control discretionary spending, you can get some significant controls over spending generally.
All right. How is this received? I know that last week, I was going to say not well. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton last week talked about the fact that how our debt is a national security issue. Yeah. So this is not just parties fighting against each other or politics. This is a very serious problem to us.
It's a huge problem. I mean, our debt is not only going to undermine the prosperity of our children because they're going to have a lower standard of living, it's going to undermine our country's capacity to be secure because we're not going to have the type of economic strength we need to support a strong national defense or a strong international policy. And so we have to get this debt under control. And discretionary spending is one of the things we do. We should freeze it. I happen to think we should cut it by 2% every year for the next 5 years, thus taking it down actually by 10%. But at the minimum, we should freeze the spending. Freeze it at last year's spending levels, carry that freeze forward.
All right. I don't know anybody in politics, House, Senate, or the executive branch, who doesn't think that the debt is a serious problem. But why can't, everyone says it's horrible and our deficit is horrible, but how come we can't get anybody to actually do something?
Politics. You know, it's much easier to spend money to get people to vote for you than to say to somebody who's getting a program, I'm sorry, we're going to have to give you less than we gave you last year, or we're not going to give you as big an increase as you expected. It's the politics of the next election. You know, Congresses are good at dealing with maybe trying to make a political statement, but they're not good when they have to take that political statement down to specifics. When you go from 30,000 feet to the ground level, when you say, I want to reduce spending, in a generalized term, but then you get into the specifics of actually having to reduce spending, Congress doesn't do a very good job.
All right, I don't want to be an alarmist, but based on what you say, I mean, if Congress can't do a very good job, and if spending is a very effective tool for politicians, and if they add every year, and if the national debt is creating national security problems, as the Secretary of State has said, at some point it seems we're going to implode.
That's right. That's exactly what's going to happen.
So, got any idea when that's going to happen and what it's going to mean?
Sooner rather than later.
What's sooner rather than later? My lifetime?
Oh, long before that. I think that we're on a track right now where we're essentially going to be in a Greek-like situation within 5 to 7 years, where the international community looks at the size of our deficits and our debt and says, you really can't pay these off.
So what does that mean? So we can't pay our bills? I mean, so we can't pay our bills, then what?
Well, 2 or 3 things happen and they're all bad. You have to inflate the currency in order to pay off your debts with inflated dollars, which means that everybody's standard of living goes down and your savings are eroded dramatically. You have to dramatically increase taxes, which means that people are going to lose jobs because it's going to slow the economy to dramatically increase taxes. Or you actually end up with a default situation, which I don't think would happen.
What happens if we default?
What happens if we
Yeah,
default?
what does happen if
Then
we
you
default?
can't borrow money the next day.
So China just says no more.
China says no more, and then the next day when you have to meet your bill and you don't have the money in your cash flow to pay for it, and you got to go out and borrow it, somebody's going to say, oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you any more money because you just defaulted. Or the interest rate on that money is going to be so high that it's going to be unsustainable. You know, and a very interesting fact here is that within 10 years under the Obama President budget plan, interest on the debt, which is a payment to China, by the way, which we get no benefit from, or whoever's lending us the money, will be the biggest item in the federal budget. It will be bigger than national defense, $800 billion.
Wow. Well, Senator, nice to see you, sir, and lots of big news in your home state.
It is. We're going to have a very interesting election. We've got a very strong candidates up and down the line, but the first news going to succeed me, hopefully. Kelly Ayotte, our former Attorney General, is a really talented individual who I'm excited about as our nominee.
Well, we're going to miss you here in Washington.
Greta, that's nice of you to say. I hope you'll still talk to me.
I'll still talk to you, and we still got 2 months before the election.
All right.
Thanks, sir. Well, if you haven't